Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kubernetes community meeting for November 29th, 2018. As always, this meeting is recorded and broadcast on YouTube, so say nothing you don't want to share with the entire internet. We have a number of topics for the meeting today. Although I expect it to be overall a short meeting because it is the week before KubeCon, the week before release, and on top of which a bunch of people are at AWS reInvent. So that said, the first thing here is, can someone volunteer to take notes? We need a note taker for this meeting. So that we can actually keep up with all of the content and that people can read up and watch the portions of the videos that they want to see.
I can do it.
Okay, thank you. First order here is we have our demo of the week, the Docs Modeling Working Group, Andrew Chen and Dominic Tornow. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, Dominic, excuse me if I'm not, are going to be presenting on a demo, I guess, of what they've come up with for modeling our docs. So you want to go ahead?
Sure. It's not exactly a demo per se, but yeah, we'll be doing a presentation on what we've been working on. Let me share my screen here. What's this one? All right, let me know if you can see that.
It's coming through on mine.
Okay. All right. Okay, so all right, so Dominic works at SAP, and he's on loan to us from SAP for about 6 months to work on modeling. And this is something that we're working on to improve like people's mental models of how Kubernetes works. Because I'm sure all of you remember when you started learning Kubernetes, like, what was your experience? Well, it's a beast. Everyone says that. And, it has this high perceived complexity, but when you actually take a look at like the patterns that it uses, the design patterns, there's actually a limited number, and it's used to build up its functional complexity, and it's actually quite elegant. But like in learning it, it's quite difficult. So why is there this disconnect, right? So then this points to actually a communications issue, and then Dominic's going to talk about modeling and how we might use it. Dominic, you there? Hang on, I think he's on mute. Dominic, I think you're still on mute.
So
there you are. I heard you for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, sorry for that. So in modeling general, we work on the premise that if two equally capable individuals study the same system in depth, they will arrive at the same mental model. Now, Andrew, if you could go to the next slide.
Yep.
Thank you. In the case of documentation, we have one individual that studies the system and then subsequently communicates his or her mental model. And during this communication, we face encoding loss of information. We may not put our mental model in the correct words or diagrams, and we face decoding loss at the receiver, where the receiver may misunderstand what we are trying to convey. And this leads to different mental models. At best, to incomplete mental models. At worst, incorrect mental models. Andrew, can you take the next? Thank you. And with FMC, the fundamental modeling concepts, we are trying to minimize encoding loss and decoding loss. and therefore enhance the efficiency of communication, aiming at a complete and correct knowledge transfer in the context of Kubernetes. Andrew, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, so looking at the whole doc set, I realized that the docs are very task focused. They're not really concept focused. So we introduced concepts on a need to know basis. But because we kind of don't weave them all together into a coherent picture, it's hard for people to reason about what Kubernetes behavior is. And one example of this is like if you just take a look at this replica set, right? So if you take a look at this YAML, like what do you think it would produce, right? So most people think we would say this replica set specifies a desired state of 3 pods, each pod consisting of 1 BusyBox container, right? That's what we normally think. But if you actually look at what Kubernetes does, it only pays attention to the label, like app BusyBox. It just wants 3 pods with these labels on. So, in most situations, this just works fine with our mental model, right? We, like in a 0 state, if there's no pods already, we deploy that replica set, it will create these 3 pods with these containers, and it all, works the way we expect. But in a situation where, like, what if you already have 3 pods up and running and they have these labels, but they actually have different containers in it, right? Then the expected behavior, or the behavior might be different than what you might expect, because you're thinking, like you want these pods with these specific container specs, but if they're, if they're already pods, but they're running different containers, but they have the same app labels still, then the replica set won't do anything, right? And so this is where, our mental models may collide with like how it actually works. So we need to do a better job in documentation to help people craft their mental models so they understand the behavior of Kubernetes, right? So the docs should help users develop mental models so that they may reason about what Kubernetes actually does. So this is where we're going to bring in FMC, which is fundamental modeling concepts. And then Dominic's going to talk about this some more.
So the fundamental modeling concepts have been developed in the context of SAP many years ago. And the fundamental modeling concepts is an approach to system modeling that contains concise definition and formal and conceptual models of a system's structure and behavior. And Andrew, thank you.
Yeah.
And so this is the demo part. Of course, these are just tidbits in the limited amount of time. In the last 3 months, we applied this approach to various aspects of Kubernetes. On this slide, for example, you see a definition of what a steady state actually is, and it depicts Kubernetes' overall behavior on the highest. That is, its convergence towards a steady state. In this case, you see a graphical model that accompanies a formal model in the Alloy specification language. Andrew, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. This slide depicts Kubernetes, a high-level architecture. It shows the core components and their interactions. Already on this slide, even without accompanying text, you can deduce or include that individual components do not communicate directly with each other, but only indirectly via the API server. You can already come to the conclusion that components do not share state by communicating, but they communicate by sharing state, which is a central aspect of Kubernetes design. And the next slide, please. Thank you. This slide shows a deep dive into Kubernetes high availability setup. It depicts a multi-master setup and also does highlight Kubernetes implementation of leader election. As I said, for the sake of time, these are just tidbits. If you're interested in this approach to modeling and to the models that we came up with so far, you may find a list of references later in this presentation that Andrew is going to share.
Yeah, so as you can see from those examples, like we'll be adding a lot more diagrams to it, but it's not just about diagrams. We're also trying to sort of prescribe like how people should think about Kubernetes and the different parts of it and how it works. And that way they'll be able to understand like what it will do in certain situations. Because if you look at like the issue queue in the Kubernetes repo, like a lot of times the engineers will point users to specific lines of code, you know, to explain what it does in a situation. But we would rather people like understand how things work without having to actually look at the source code. So what we've been working on for the past couple months, so our process is like coming up with these models, right? So first we kind of test them out and we do like a little presentation at the weekly SIG Docs meeting, right? We call it like Fun with Modeling, kind of after the Sheldon Cooper on, you know, on Big Bang Theory. And then, you know, so the first, we do that, but also we talk to engineers, we interview them, and we like, you know, ask them in-depth questions, and then we try to validate these models. And like these two steps are not necessarily, they can be in either order, right? So we'll bounce back and forth until as we kind of iterate on the different models. So we've already interviewed different engineers that are been working on, you know, master components or Node or API machinery to really like make sure that the models are correct and that what we're saying is correct. And then we've been creating some posts on Medium, and this is to help us refine like how we introduce these topics and explain how they work, and also to get feedback. That way, like, you know, it helps us to kind of mature the models and make sure that what we're saying is correct and in a way that people can digest. And then once we're done with that, the plan is to then fold that back into Kubernetes.io. So we're kind of working our way through different topics right now, but tentatively in Q1, we're going to start like opening up PRs and adding a lot of this content back into Kubernetes.io. So it won't necessarily be in the same format as like the blog posts are, but the information, the diagrams, and a lot of the descriptions for how we explain how things work will be included. So then if you have any questions, let us know. And then here's our contact info. You can reach us on Slack.
Okay, thank you very much. We're out of time for questions during the meeting. So if you do have questions for Andrew and Dominic, follow up with them on Slack or in SIG Docs or in the usual places. If you guys could add links to the community meeting notes to those slides and to whatever repo you have.
Okay, will do.
That would be terrific. Okay, next up, let's talk about releases, starting with the current release. Aish?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. So 1.13 is currently on track to release this Monday, 12.3. We lifted code freeze late yesterday night. So master is now open for 1.14 development, and we can see a bunch of PRs merging in. As for 1.13, we are only accepting absolutely critical bug fixes at this point. So if there's anything that's critical and needs to go in 1.13, please let the release team know so that we can get it cherry picked, but we are keeping it to absolutely critical fixes at this point. So the release is targeted for Monday, and if you still have any outstanding doc, PRs, or release notes that need to go into 1.13, please work with the release team to get those wrangled ASAP. That's mostly it for this release. We have a retrospective that's targeted at the community meeting next week, 12.6, and I've added a link to the retro doc. So please, if you have any comments or any suggestions, please add that to the doc. That's it from my end. Take questions if there are any.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to being off the release team again too. For patch releases, we had patch release updates on all branches, all actively maintained branches earlier this week. Do we have any of the patch maintainers here who want to say anything to that? Okay. We'll go ahead anyway. A bunch of patch updates, I think mostly this Monday. for 112, 111, and 110. As a reminder, anybody who's still on 1.9 really needs to upgrade, or you need commercial support so they backport those things for you. So those are where we are with the release. So let's go ahead and move on to SIG updates. And that's going to start with SIG architecture and one of our new SIG architecture leads, Matt Farina. Matt?
Hello. All right. I can share my screen to share the deck. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
All right. So this is based on the template with some tweaks. So for those of you who don't know, SIG architecture is concerned with things like maintaining the architectural consistency over time. There's policy and governance stuff like the API governance. All API changes go through a very thorough process. The deprecation policy, code organization. There's the KEP process. Even though many SIGs will handle KEPs themselves, we do own the process. And just general issues around Kubernetes scope. That's kind of what SIG architecture in general is concerned with. Since the last update, this is kind of the list of things we've been working on. The charter was accepted and merged, which actually took a little while for us to get through. We are working on the KEP process, things like what require a KEP, where KEPs are going to live, automation around them. We are ongoing and working on those right now. We've done a lot of talking around the process, and there's some tools and issues that are being worked in the background to improve that. We're working on things like code organization, how to handle staging, how to handle importing Kubernetes/Kubernetes, because there are a lot of people who are importing that. And between things like minor versions, we are breaking APIs, and Go modules are coming, and how are we going to handle all of that? So that's one of the ongoing things. We don't have a solution for it, but we are trying to figure it out. We've been working with SIG Windows on a plan for Windows GA. They had hoped to get it into 1.13, but we weren't able to. And so we're working on what does it mean for Windows to go GA, hopefully in 1.14. And general guidance on GA in general for things in the future that want to go there to make sure all the boxes are checked and everyone's on the same page. And then we're discussing, trying to figure out when we're going to bring in conformance profiles for conformance testing. And a good example of that is some clusters will have Windows, others won't. And how do you handle conformance for those different kinds of situations? And profiles has been one of the things that is being discussed as a way to do that. And last week, I became a co-chair to try and relieve some of the pressure on Brian and Jason in the process. We do have a few sub-projects, and so I'll go through those real quick. We have the API reviews, and here's the status on it. We have a process, and I won't open it up for the API reviews, and we do have a status board. If you go to the Kubernetes SIGs org, there is a repo called Architecture Tracking, and it's got a bunch of different projects. And in there is one for the API reviews, and you can see what's completed, what's currently underway and assigned, and then what's in the backlog that's coming that we know that needs to be dealt with. And so right now, just as always, there's ongoing API reviews. It's been a few days since the board's been updated, so there might be some changes, but there's constant API reviews happening by a group of people who are responsible for that. Then there's the KEPs. The big thing to know about KEPs is they're going to be moving over to the Enhancements repo from the community repo. I think it's tomorrow, or tomorrow's the last day, but it's coming up very, very soon. So if you've got a KEP or a change to a KEP, see about getting it merged as soon as possible. So that way that change can be moved when everything gets moved, or that PR will have to be opened again on the Enhancements repo probably. We do have a dashboard for tracking this as well that looks at things that are in the backlog, SIG review, things that need architecture API reviews, because there's lots of things that need to come to SIG architecture to work out some details or need an API review, and then things that are being implemented and in process. And so we do have a board that tracks that as well. This is a short-term thing. If you actually want to help with these kinds of toolings, let me know and we can point you in the right direction. But for now, we're tracking it here. We're looking to get a little bit better process and tooling around this as well, so it's not as manual to manage it on a board. And then our third sub-project would be the conformance testing. And you can see we've got things and changes to that are in flight. It's being minimally worked, so if you're interested in helping with that, please let us know. But this is how conformance testing, because SIG architecture owns what is conformance and how we're going to modify that over time. And so this walks through how we're working on and improving the conformance testing. So if you're interested in contributing, there's several ways you can do. One, review KEPs related to the SIGs that you're in. If you're in a SIG, actually, if you go back to the KEP board, you will find that there aren't just KEPs that you own, but there are ones that are related to you. And so if you come to this dashboard and say you're in SIG storage and you clicked on SIG storage, you can see all of the ones that are related to you, because somebody in another SIG may have said, hey, this relates to SIG storage or this relates to SIG networking, and I'm going to put them on a relates. Take a look at them and give them feedback, especially if you're a technical leader or chair. Make sure that these things get reviewed, because you might be surprised what other SIGs think relate to you that they're working on KEPs on. So the first thing I would suggest is if you want to contribute, review the KEPs related to your SIGs. At the Kubernetes Contributor Summit, there is a BOF on KEPs. It's right after lunch, I think. Wonderful timing. So if you're at the Contributor Summit, please come and we can continue to discuss that. If you're interested in one of the sub-projects that I just walked through, being a part of it, ask us chairs. We are looking for better documentation and reviews on things and how to get involved. And of course, if you want to learn more, come and attend a meeting. It's right after the community meeting in the hour afterwards. Please feel free to come attend a SIG architecture meeting and see what we talk about and what we have going on. And you can find more about us. Here's the links and details like that. I guess with that, do I have time for questions? I tried to go pretty quick.
Yeah, you did go pretty quick. We could take one or two questions, if there are any. Questions? Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, you know where to find SIG architecture on their mailing list, on Slack, and apparently on the various Kanban boards stretched across GitHub. So next up for SIGs, SIG scalability had to postpone because of lead availability, poor lead availability this week. Tim Pepper, who is one of our leads for SIG Release, pointed out that while there is a release update every week, we don't generally talk about SIG Release once, so he is here to remedy that.
Yeah, so we have people from Release here every week talking about the current release, and once a quarter we do a retrospective, but SIG Release has actually not told you what we do and what we're doing, what we're changing on an ongoing basis. So I'm Tim Pepper. I work for VMware. I am one of the new chairs in SIG Release, and just wanted to give a little bit of a rundown on what we are, what we're doing to start getting more transparency on that, more information. So what we do, this is coming straight from our charter. The link is there, but we are about putting out the Kubernetes releases on a reliable schedule. We are also very much about mentoring and growing. It's a challenge to put out the release, and it's a very easy place to have burnout, and there's a huge spread of engagement to make sure that the releases get out and to manage some of that complexity around burnout. So we put a lot of effort into having a formal process of shadowing and bringing people into that and training and rolling things over. And the goal is that we have something that's supportable over time, that it's not just for 3 months. Wouldn't say we're perfect on that. We have a lot of work to do to continue improving it. Additionally, we touch on tooling. Some of this overlaps with other SIGs in terms of just basic testing, but also SIG testing and test infrastructure for the overall project. But where that comes into the release process, we have involvement and some co-ownership as well. And then a goal of automating things. And I highlighted some words on this slide and didn't highlight the D in automated, because I think a lot of us believe there's not as much as we want automated. So we have a lot of work to do around automate still. But that is a clear goal of the SIG. And then we partner very much with the other SIGs. SIG Release, sometimes we say that we don't do real work. Like release engineering is real and hard work. Integration is hard. But all of the other SIGs that are doing feature development, we work with them to ensure that their code flows smoothly into a release and that we have release vehicles that are reliable, predictable for people who are trying to get content out to the users of Kubernetes. And this has actually been one kind of a frequently asked question, and wanted to just briefly touch on what the process looks like. And one thing to highlight here is that traditionally we've called it features, but now we've actually switched over to enhancements. But open source, you've always got feature or enhancement discussion going on, but in the release process on this quarterly sort of 3-month cycle we currently have, 4 releases a year, we have an initial period where we work with the SIGs to narrow that discussion down into sort of more committed work and tracked work. And at that point, sort of 4 weeks in, we have an enhancements freeze. So that is the work that we are tracking as a release team so that we can do specific risk management and tracking on what is going into the release. But then it's open source, master's open, code's just flying in for quite a few weeks. Eventually we hit a period we call code slush, where we're trying to kind of bring down that velocity a bit, and then code freeze, where we're very specifically freezing the master branch. This is also the time where a release branch gets created, so you start to have a fork for the release versus master, and code gets either fast forwarded from master off to that release branch or cherry picked as we go through this phase. This phase is shrinking the freeze. We're trying to make this lighter, more efficient for people. But at that point during code freeze, it's all about critical bug fixing and solidifying the CI test signal, which ideally has been green all along, but invariably we have regressions that we have to manage and work on fixing. Basically, right around now, this was last night, code freeze ends for the current release and master branch reopens, and effectively master as of today is 1.14 content. The release has been branched for a number of weeks now, and we will only be picking content back over to it. And then finally, we make our release and the cycle carries on. So there's a release life cycle. This is sort of what this year looked like. You have that 3-month period, and then 9 months currently is what we do for patch releases on one of those branches. And we iterate across the year and continue on. So we've got a bunch of deep operational details that we've documented on how we do this, and a link there. And then there's also a kind of newer document in the contributor developer guide on what this looks like, and as a developer in Kubernetes or a SIG lead, how you work on targeting issues and PRs to a particular release milestone. So that's just sort of like the quick overview release process stuff for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with it. So back to sort of normal SIG update stuff, what we did last cycle. We have merged a charter, and we've had some turnover in our chairs. Jace has graduated onto emeritus status, and huge thank yous from everybody on SIG Release, past, current release teams, to everything he does on an ongoing basis. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then Stephen Augustus at Red Hat and myself from VMware have joined as chairs, in addition to Caleb Miles, who is continuing. I think at this point, I mean, I already touched on it briefly, but the naming features moving to enhancements, that was communicated pretty broadly on KDev, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next slides. But last cycle, so 1.12 release, it went out more or less on time. We were usually within a few days on the releases. Another highlight there is we had our first non-Google branch manager. We're working on, like I said earlier, kind of spreading the team, ensuring that there's more sustainability. Some of this making the sausage type of stuff on the release had started out very much Google-centric in terms of how the automation and controls around security and things like that happen. So we continue to peel away the last vestiges of Kubernetes by Google versus the open project that we are, and we're basically almost down to 0 on that, so that's awesome progress. We've done a bunch around documenting, so the role handbooks that I referred to on the prior slide as well, that there are lots of info on how we operationally do releases. We've continued shortening the code freeze period, and in last cycle also the move to Tide was something that very well discussed here in the community meetings as well. So things that are coming up, more around features and enhancements. KEPs are moving out of K community. There's a KDev post link there. I think Caleb sent that yesterday, but there's discussion there I would encourage folks to look at. Our 113 release, Aisha's just given the update. We are on track for December 3. Something to call out here, this is the shortest release cycle ever, which is testament to Aisha's leadership, I think, but also all the other SIG leads for focusing on constraining the content, focusing on stability. And to do it short, but also have it on time is awesome teamwork on everybody. In terms of our dashboards in TestGrid, we've moved things that were flaky or unmaintained, undermaintained from blocking to informing. In past releases, the release team has really had to kind of visually sort and say, like, that thing is always a problem. We're just going to kind of ignore it for right now, but we're starting to formalize and clean that up. And ideally, then some of those things, if they're important, we'll get them fixed up, get them maintained, and bring back in. But we're doing just some coordinating so that we have a more reliable signal, even if the signal perhaps has less in it. Reliable is better than volume. And then we're starting to shift stable branch management to a team. So myself and Alexandra Malakowski from Google, we're going to be the branch managers for 113. In the past, this has always been one individual for that whole 9-month period. And that's another way that we felt this isn't particularly sustainable. So we've got 2 for the first time, and then we're going to work on kind of defining a process that maybe makes that a team, and maybe the team covers multiple releases instead of one person in this disjoint sort of waterfally way. The 114 release, some things we have on our mind coming up. We want to work on continuing to improve how we build RPMs and DEBs. There's an issue linked there. And then also build tools around that, and some other things need some cleaning up. We've got some duplication there. This enhancement versus features stuff that we talked about, or I've talked about briefly before, continue refining the process there. Code freeze, in addition to shortening it, making sure that it actually works right for people understand it, and the process is smooth and efficient without undue risk to release stability. And then that ties into TIDE and automation and labels, and how we make the merge process, again, efficient and transparent and understood. And then continuing on that shift to stable branch management, becoming more of a team. Another big topic area is discussion around release cadence and possibly changing that, faster, slower, DevL stable, and I've got some more slides to talk about that, but that'll be just a little bit later here. So one other area, maybe less specific to the cycle so much, is SIG release during the coming period. We want to do a more formalization of our sub-projects. We've been very much focused and overly busy just on getting releases out. But release team is arguably a sub-project of SIG release, and not the only one. It happens to almost be the only one that's had consistent staffing, though. So part of changing that is defining what are the other things we want to do, documenting them, trying to start getting more volunteers involved, and make some progress operationally on some other things. So areas we've been talking about are sort of broadly release engineering and infrastructure automation improvements. A sub-portion of that is license compliance validation. There's been some looking going on over the last months on that, trying to formalize and maybe finish off some things there, but get something more ongoing and staffed as well. And then again, another subpart of release engineering is release security. We have a PST, a product security team that's effectively a committee that's focused on CVE management, but there's a broader set of operational security things that we should be doing on an ongoing basis, improving, documenting, security, threat modeling, the provenance for our build artifacts, signing of our build artifacts. All of that comes together, and it's a big space where we could use subject matter experts getting involved and working on improving our processes. And then finally, we have just recently sponsored a working group that we're calling Working Group LTS. More on that in the coming slides. So how all of this affects you, obviously with anything KEP related, watch for KEPs in the usual places. I think Matt covered that really, really nicely in his update just a few minutes ago. And then on the LTS front, get involved in those discussions, and that's where it is right now, discussion, open. It's better if you're involved earlier as things are drafted versus at the point that it turns into a KEP and you're a stakeholder and you review at that point and it didn't have your early input. You end up with with less optimal things being proposed. That working group will, though, very proactively be asking certain SIG leads who are clearly blocking stakeholders to get involved earlier, but the more broadly the community is thinking about this, the better. But to be more specific, what is this working group LTS thing? So it's in early formation. There is a bunch of discussion, a very long thread, and lots of opinions on KDev. There's some links here for folks who would like to read more about it, but we've got a PR out to be added to the SIG list. At the bottom, there's a set of working groups. One of the things that we're doing there is to have a proposed charter of what the working group is, which isn't technically required in the governance model, but it really helps to define the scoping, because this idea of support and long-term support is very contentious. There's also a PR underway right now that Jordan Liggett's doing just to better clarify what is our support stance. Like I briefly described like 3 months patches, but what does that really actually mean? And what are the version SKUs? How do we manage an actual update path for our end users? So getting that better defined today is a really big deal, and that's a very active PR in terms of discussion. There's a link to more information about where to find the working group. We've got regular meetings, Google Group, Slack, all the regular things, and then there's also a presentation there, just sort of trying to give a sense of initially what we think this working group is doing. And a lot of that's echoed also in the charter document. So how you can contribute. SIG Release definitely always needs release team volunteers. There's a link there to a presentation I did at KubeCon EU, just talking about how to get involved in the release team and how there's a lot of opportunity. And this is also not just about coding. We need project management, documentation, test, release management, communication, security, all sorts of skills. So if that's you, or you employ people who do that and you can be more involved in open source, this is a great place to start contributing to the community. We have our regular SIG release meetings. We're trying to be more regular about that every 2 weeks. And one of the focus areas over the coming period will be better defining and staffing our sub-projects, and then kept drafting related to all of that. Where to find us, there's links to our current chairs, our homepage, our Slack channel, and our Google groups. And yeah, there's a short overview of all of what we are doing right now.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any quick questions before we move on to the announcements? Okay, well, thank you for that. I did want to mention, for those of you listening, we will not have any more SIG updates until January. For our first meeting in January, the SIG updates. George, what are there 3 SIG updates for our first meeting?
Hello, sorry, you caught me off guard. Yeah, that's going to be SIG apps, SIG UI, and SIG VMware. You're going to be up as soon as we get back from holiday.
Okay. Then there is not a KEP of the week or a contributor tip of the week this week. As a reminder, those are not the exclusive property of Aaron or of SIG PM. If you are working on a KEP and you want to share it with the community and make sure that people know about it, please contact us or drop a note in the community meeting topics doc that you would like to put your KEP on the schedule, and we will do the rest. If, for that matter, you have something to share with other contributors as a way to make them more efficient or give them more information, we are looking for that for the community meeting. In the meantime, we have some announcements. So Paris and George, for Contributor Summit, community meeting, meet our contributors. You want to go ahead?
Sure. So we're sold out / waitlisted for the Contributor Summit. That's the Monday before KubeCon. If you're a SIG chair, tech lead, or sub-project owner, literally last call. We're closing it off, and we are up against the fire code as far as packing as many people as we can. So it's going to be a good event. Thanks for those of you that have been helping out, being responsive. We've gone ahead and added the schedule for that to the existing Kubernetes community calendar, and there's a link there, the bit.ly/Kubernetes-summit. And I went ahead and put that link in the #contributor summit on Slack. Do remember, please subscribe to the calendar. Don't just copy it over, just in case there are changes. And I'm working on a PR that will add some wordage on how you can do that. And there's a link there for event information if you want to look at the schedule and all the other event details. Real quick, the community meeting schedule for the rest of the year. Release Retro sounds like it's going to be good to go for next Thursday. Week after is going to be KubeCon, so no meeting. And then no KubeCons the rest of December. And as we said, January 3rd, it will be SIG Apps, SIG UI, SIG VMware. And Meet Our Contributors will be next week on 5 December. And I put the link there for those of you. So that is definitely on for December. However, Kubernetes office hours will not be going this December because we'll be at KubeCon. Any questions on any of that? Oh, and sorry, Paris is reminding me. Yes, the Contributor Summit is going on Sunday and Monday. The Sunday night there is a social event. If you click through at the garage, you can click through there. You should have RSVP'd by now, but if you haven't, please let us know.
Okay, so thank you for those announcements. That is everything except for the shoutouts. So let me go through the shoutouts. We had some shoutouts on Twitter for the 113 release team lead, Aish Sundar. You can follow the link there. Another shout out to Aish for keeping us in line the whole cycle as an awesome team release lead. A shout out to Amarai for adding a search bar to test grid so you don't have to dig to find the right dashboard, which is pretty cool if you haven't found it yet. So that is your release mini tip. That is your contributor mini tip for the week, is that we now have a search bar in test grid, which I have already made use of. So I'll reinforce that. Shout out to Mikura and Saad Ali and Michelle Awe for rapid responses and extensive work to multiple storage test flakes and issues with the new CSI 1.0 in testing. To Mr. Han for fast and insightful help with SIG network flakes. A huge shout out from Aish to all of the 113 release leads and shadows for efforts at every stage throughout the cycle, enabling us to stabilize and hopefully release on time. We were scheduled to release on time. We're actually kind of run out of time to change that schedule. So to release on time, and she lists all of the section leads there. I'm not going to read them out. Plus a special shout out to a bunch of people who are not technically on the release team, but who have really been doing as much work as anybody whose name is on that release team roster, as many of them often do, including Dims, Liggett, Justin, Christoph, Ben, and Stephen Augustus. And then finally, a shout out to Mr. Bobby Tables for significantly reducing Gwyn's administrative overhead for the new contributor workshop. So thank you, everyone. Everyone who contributes to make this a great project. And if you know somebody who has done something special to make Kubernetes great, then please post it in the shoutouts channel in Slack so that we can read them off for the community meeting and so they can know that they are appreciated. And with that, we are going to finish up this meeting. See many of you at KubeCon. Thanks.